Yo, this is Dylan Orosz, your local writer, and I wanted to verbally kind of like pitch out my various book ideas. Partly spearheaded for marketing my new/debut book, two books, releasing this week, Journeyers, book 1 and 2, epic fantasy, sword and sorcery. And yeah, I'm going to get into the pitch. I kind of want to read out my pitches I've written before on my website and then kind of like riff on the origins for the idea, my inspirations, and just like any commentary I have. And I'll probably cut like the Journeyers part of this as its own little video slash like podcast here. And then I'll have the full video for like all of my ideas as another separate longer video. Yeah, so I am a writer of primarily up to this point short stories and kind of like essays or critiques on like some of my favorite art, especially like movies and anime, TV shows, video games. I've written a lot of like video game critiques and video game reviews, but also getting into like a lot of the stories of video games that I'm like super fascinated by, like Metal Gear Solid and Elden Ring. Bloodborne is one of my favorite things I've ever played and then wrote about. So yeah, I come from the tradition of like short story writing as far as fiction and then kind of essay writing. And I have gotten into novels now because of the origin story of this idea for Journeyers. It's an epic fantasy, kind of like it's YA, I say like teen plus as far as the target audience. The origin story for Journeyers is that originally it was me and a friend theorizing an animated series that we wanted to like concept out and start to like, create together. And he was getting into Pixar animation classes and then also getting into character concept art and drawing like kind of cartoon characters, getting better at just drawing in general. And then I'd been, writing as a hobby for all these years. And we discussed before, like some like book ideas or novel ideas I've had, and kind of, he'd read my short stories before. So like, he was like, hey, let's get together and like create an animated series concept. You be the writer, help with the story and all that. And then I'll help with the concept art and like, we, collaborate this. It's kind of like a side project, not related to our present careers and whatnot. And it was at Kinney Fort Pub in Round Rock, Texas, where I came up with the idea based on an old icebreaker / like social game I played in college on a trip where this fish camp counselor went to A&M. She, was well-versed in doing icebreakers and getting like, new groups that were forming together to go, for like a field trip or whatever. How do you break the ice? It's one of those things that people are annoyed by. It's like everybody go around the circle and say your name and a fun fact about you. It's like everybody dreads that. But ultimately, it's important if you're going to be in a group for like the next days, weeks to like get this going. You got to get people to get to know each other. You got to get people talking, get people excited to be there and talking with each other and spending time together. So she had this idea that was fascinating to me, clearly fascinating, and that stuck in my mind from back then to, fast forward to a few years ago, and I had the origin story for Journeyers. It stuck in my mind, this concept. So the idea, it was a game where you go around, you set the premise, and you go around and give everybody's answers. So the premise is, okay, you're embarking on a journey across a forest. You're walking, from point A to point B through a woods, mysterious woods, mysterious wilderness area, and you have with you at your command a monkey, a snake, and a bird. They're basically like your pets, well trained, they know how to do things. And the question is, okay, how do you proceed across this adventure? How do you carry yourself across this forest, and how do you use or command your animals to act to help you complete this journey? And I remember I still remember my answer well, because it was like the obvious thing, like it would still be my answer today as far as like, okay, you have to assess. I looked at it from an analytical standpoint. So you have to assess what are the capabilities of each animal outside of yourself. The human's versatile, and it's like, okay, you're going to carry yourself. You have to bring gear to like travel and all that, wear good shoes, That's the basic thing on like the self side. And then it's like, okay, the monkey I would have in my backpack or just traveling like at my back and kind of like shadowing me to like watch my back and to alert me of any danger as kind of like a local scout. And then I would have the bird be a far range, long range scout. Obviously you send the bird out to look ahead, see if there's any problems, kind of scout, get a bird's eye view of the area, get an overview of your situation. The bird's like arguably the most important for like pathfinding and traversing a wilderness you don't know about. And then the snake as like a comical thing, I remember saying like have it as like your belt or just have it in your pocket. And then I like made also the joke, pocket sand. Pocket sand is the idea of Dale Gribble from King of the Hill, where it's like he has sand in his pocket. So if he gets attacked by anybody, he can like nonchalantly throw sand in their face because he has his hand in his pocket. So pocket sand is the idea is like a hidden weapon. So snake would be, I would use it as like a hidden last defense against, something attacking you, such as a tiger. So the idea is, what do these animals represent for the social game, for the icebreaker? Go around the circle, give everybody's answers. And I was surprised at how different people's answers were. Everybody had way different answers. Nobody was even similar. Nobody was just like, yeah, I would do what he said. Like, it was like everybody had their own answer. It's interesting. People were being funny, all that stuff. It did its job. It broke the ice. And you get back, and then she's like, here's what it means. The monkey is supposed to represent like family or like close friends. The bird is supposed to represent like technology or knowledge. Like, how do you use knowledge? And then the snake is money or wealth. It's like, okay. And then everybody goes through and it's like, oh, you like to use your wealth as a weapon. And then, you're using knowledge to look ahead and plan things out. You like to keep your family close and you like your family to watch your back or whatever. And it's like, yeah, that's all basic stuff. And also fits, I guess it fits my personality, I guess, but it also fits like what these animals are capable of. So it's an analytical thing. So fast forward a few years, more like a decade, basically. I guess less than a decade, but sitting in the bar at Caney Fort Pub, drinking a beer, getting a little tipsy. I was at like a liminal state where I'm like, you're at your peak buzz. And I got to thinking about, our animated series. What is the concept? What are the characters? What does it look like? And I went back to this icebreaker where it's like, okay, a dude traveling with a bird, monkey, and a snake. What if it's like Narnia? They're all talking. It's like living in a fantasy world where the animals can all speak. Or like Hunter x Hunter was another huge inspiration. Like, okay, those are our 4 characters. They each have 4 stories. They come together as like by happenstance. So they're each coming from separate entire worlds before this. And you make it in the middle of a fantasy war between 2 sides. It's a civil war. It's between 2 sides of the same side. So it's like, okay, we have a spy for one of the sides of the war, a character that's closely associated with this war, which is like the background event that's taking place. The story goes on. And then you have, and then the other key idea was coming up with the birds being a separate species that lives away and is not part of the forest. So the forest becomes the setting. The characters become these complex little tunes that have, separate backstories that we're going to unravel as they join up and have to travel together. You have the found family stuff. Hunter x Hunter inspiration was like, okay, this is going to be like a battle series where it's like a journey where we have battle sequences and all that. So that's the background of Journeyers, and then I'll get into more of the story here as I'm just going to read the pitch. So I have my pitches kind of laid out very formally, almost like it's like a form I'm filling out, because I find that it's satisfying for myself to organize the information, but then also for readers to just see what they're getting into. It's like, okay, the title of the book, Journeyers Book 1 and 2, Form, Duology of Novels, 400 pages and 600 pages. And that's based on the average number of words per page in the average book. And I literally took books off my shelf and counted them because I was trying to get an understanding of page count. And I'm still off because the ebooks are way longer page counts, which is unfortunately going to be a problem, I think, for pitching and marketing the book. But in a normal like 400 to 450 words per page paperback, the first novel, book 1 is 400 pages, book 2 is 600 pages. The whole story is about 1,000 pages. So it's a deep, robust, heavy story. There's a lot of plot. I wouldn't say, I think a lot of modern writers, or a lot of like advice that I've I've delved into all the modern writing advice, believe me. And it's like, the average reader, 90,000 words is like the average, or like what most agents are looking for as far as keep your book around 90,000 words, especially for a debut, because it's like readers don't want to read long books. It's also it's more expensive to obviously print a larger book, but it's just like less people are going to read it. It's harder to get into. But the bottom line is this story, it's not like I set out to write 1,000 pages. It's just this story and the outline turned out to need this many words. So it's a long story, but at least I hope is very satisfying and like rich, like a steak. There's a lot going on with this story. So yeah, duology of novels, book 1, 400 pages, book 2, 600 pages. Genre, epic fantasy is the primary genre, I would say. Action, adventure, and then sword and sorcery. So I list 3 genres here just to give like Amazon lets you list out like super crazy subgenres and all that. So epic fantasy, I'd say, is like the main genre, and that's because epic fantasy is marked by kind of sweeping large-scale stories, high power levels of characters. You have mages casting spells back and forth. But epic fantasy I would say, okay, that's not Game of Thrones then, but it's like, no, epic fantasy is also just like sweeping political stories with lots of characters. Because I would say Game of Thrones is epic fantasy, but I would also say that like, Avatar: The Last Airbender, another huge inspiration, is epic fantasy because they're battling for the fate of the world, right? So yeah, action adventure because there's a lot of combat and action sequences in my story, and then Sword of Sorcery because it's I'd say Sword of Sorcery, like Conan, Solomon Kane, or my knowledge of that genre, which I love. I love those stories. There's a lot of darkness in the stories, and there's a lot of like dark magic and like forbidden, taboo things going on. And you could say that a lot of fantasy needs that element, like the dark magic stuff, because that's like a huge draw. But I do focus on dark magic a lot in Journeyers. There's a lot of darkness, and there's a lot of like soul stuff. Like souls are discussed as like a normal, common thing, and they're invested in magic, and people are invested in souls as like something that can be utilized in a way that is like potentially horrifying, but also like just straight up powerful. So the target audience, I have teens plus for fans of Redwall, Legend of Drizzt, Hunter x Hunter. I would also add Avatar, both Avatars, The Last Airbender and Avatar, the James Cameron like epic Pandora movie. Those are also, I would say, fans of, would like Journeyers, but also just they're huge inspirations as far as like a huge aspect of the story is like man versus nature and man versus animals and man versus his wild environment and trying to wrest control over nature and a wilderness that is potentially beyond you and is housing things that you can't even fathom. And so it's teens plus. I think it's like a YA adult fantasy crossover. I don't think it's necessarily like, it's not YA focused with the story. It's YA focused with the writing style because I go out of my way to like explain a lot. I have a lot of exposition that's like educational and is designed for like a child to be able to understand this concept because I'm explaining it in an artful way. So I'm writing it to be accessible. So I'd say like it's young adult because I think kids, this is the type of book I would have loved to read at like 11 years old, even knowing that it was a little bit beyond me as far as like the language. And then even knowing that like, maybe if my parents knew everything that was in the book, like people fighting each other, killing each other with swords and whatnot, maybe my parents wouldn't like that. But like, I think it's fine for kids to read Lord of the Rings, but there's tons of horrible things in Lord of the Rings that are like super violent and, some parents may want to censor their kids from. That's something I could get into a lot about as far as like how we make art for children and how we make art for like preteens and like the adolescent era, which is like hugely vital to like how people grow up and like, set their worldviews and whatnot, which is why there's so much like war over censorship over what books are in schools, libraries and everything, because everybody's trying to indoctrinate children and with their own schemes. And, people think that environmentalism means like, it's the culture war stuff. And it's just like, that's all part of it. But it's also like, it's important that we teach children morals is the point that I'm making, is that it's important that children know what good and evil is And it's important that they understand that like transformation is possible. You need to defeat evil with like cunning and curiosity, and you need to like know that understanding people is important, and compassion is something that makes you stronger. These are all things that are values of mine that I firmly believe we should be imparting into every human being. But yeah, children need to have stories that show them things like this. So this is all part of my mindset and why I wrote Journeyers, why I wrote it the way I wrote it, what's in Journeyers, what the characters are like and all that. So yeah, Redwall is a huge inspiration. Talking animals, it's like mice in a medieval world. It's like Redwall is a huge inspiration. Redwall is something that opened my mind. That was the first chapter book I ever read, I'm pretty sure, as a kid, which I don't know how old I was. I must have been like less than 10. Yeah, like Redwall was something that was like, oh, you can do Lord of the Rings, but with like mice, and then the evil is like an evil rat or a giant snake. I was like, oh, that's cool. Like that expanded my mind into all sorts of stuff. And like Hunter x Hunter is a continuation of that in the sense that like, oh, we can have stories where, you know, there's non-human characters that have greater than human intelligence and are, you know, the coolest characters. Like the Chimera Ant arc in Hunter x Hunter, it's like the coolest characters become like alien animal chimera hybrid people, and that's fucking cool. It's like really, really cool. And then Legend of Drizzt was like my first interaction with like an epic fantasy series where I actually went and read like books 1 through 20, and it's still going. I haven't read the last like 4 or 5 books of the Drizzt series by R.A. Salvatore, but that was hugely influential to me because Legend of Drizzt and the Salvatore stories are very adamant about having extended and like action sequences and big fights, like in anime, which is another huge influence and why, you know, I also wrote Journeyers with an anime sensibility. But like anime, Salvatore writes very robust and rich and satisfying back and forth action sequences, like melee action, wizard action. These are all things that are, you know, a hallmark of Dungeons and Dragons and fantasy tabletop role-playing games where, you know, the battle sequences, the battle back and forth is the enjoyment. And then, like, you know, having your characters do their abilities and powers in a stylistic way, that's anime. There's a whole tradition of this, you know, genre. Also in comic books, obviously, superheroes. So these are all my influences, like kind of where I'm coming from as far as like my brain and how I was structuring Journeyers to be a story. And yeah, then my cover art, which you can see on my website and on my Twitter and everything, was by Goran Gligovic, which is a commissioned artist that I found on Twitter and Blue Sky, and he was great to work with. He did both covers and kind of followed my full brief to the T and understood the vision and made it better, actually. So he's great, and I'm really happy with the cover art. I think cover art's a huge factor in like trying to become successful as an author in these days, obviously, but it's also important to have your cover art be something that, you know, you put some real work into, which is why I decry, you know, using AI in any way really for art is horrible, and we could have a whole conversation about that. But the AI art covers for a lot of indie books that I see just look terrible. And like, as soon as I see that, you have to doubt the writer, you have to doubt the writing. And I'm not going to support that anyways, but even if you're a great writer and you had a really cool story to tell, like using an AI art cover is such a betrayal and like a huge mistake in my view. Okay, so going on, so then I have the main characters listed because this is before the premise. The premise is going to be an extended pitch. I'll just read through it. Main characters: Apo, the boy adventurer seeking his lost sister; Oro, the snake spy undercover for the queen; Rakar, the monkey monk who does not remember his past; Isidi, the bird bard from A City in the Sky. So those are our 4 characters. Their names and backstories are very intricately woven. And I'll just get into the premise. So this is like the extended pitch of me kind of talking through. It's both synopsis and pitch. So I'm not spoiling anything major, but there's a level of synopsis here. So premise: Journeyers is a story about the fantastique of nature. Within the spiral forest, animals wield magic like language and resist the empire of mankind, residing in the heart of the spiral castle. Apo is an adventurous human boy entering the forest for the first time to find and rescue his sister, taken from his outside village as a babe. Oro is a spy snake for the rebel queen who guerrilla fights her ex-husband, the king, from the wilderness of the trees. Rakar is a childlike amnesiac monkey, as tough as the core of the earth, searching for his lost tribe and the truth of his origins. Asidi is a bird diplomat from birdkind's mysterious city in the sky, come to seek the redemption of a saga she may call her own. Together, these four characters join as one, forming at first as a team to challenge the mystical dangers of the forest, and later as a family journeying deep into historical converse and interpersonal soul descents. Our four journeyers meet as one to travel across the forest seemingly by happenstance. They interact with hidden motives that become clearer with every encounter. They begin by forming collective routines and getting a lay of the land and each other's capabilities. They battle enemies in the form of Novashaska, shape-shifting big cat and apex predator in the spiral forest, a quattro of mercenary hunters working for the king, a trio of freelancing assassins working for themselves, and various monstrous creatures known as werewolves, krikens, and tyros. They aid allies such as the mouse and bat clan, some bears, rabbits, and foxes, river otters, and traveling troops of monkey fighters. They learn of the magician, the king's most diabolical advisor, mad scientist, and true ruler of the realm. They battle his son Sir Slade in an epic showdown of their combined might. Our four journeyers learn of the Spiral Forest's harrowing history from the time of elves and giants and dragons, all gone now and nearly forgotten. It is only Oro's special knowledge that educates and the secret locales they explore which reveal hidden truths. What caused giant kind to chase mankind into the forest? How did the elves originally discover and harness magic? Why did man and elf join together in the creation of the dragon? Where are the elven histories? Who has man become today? All these clashing civilizations behind him. So many animals in opposition. The forest spiraling chaotically around his iron will within the wood. These questions and more become answerable only by following the spiral path alongside our four intrepid journeyers. They traverse vast forestry, swampland, hills and groves, the Sorin River, one mystic tower, and the subterranean caverns of a hollowing earth, meeting many strange friends and foes along the way. Altogether, Journeyers is a mystic action-adventure featuring four inquisitive heroes seeking the horizons of truths and interconnections within such a fantastical natural world. Environmentalism, the magic of the animals, the power of storytelling, and uncovering true history are some key themes and messages. At the castle in the center of the spiral, the fate of the forest and our Journeyers will be realized. So yeah, that's like the full pitch for Journeyers, and I think that does a good. I'm basically using that as the book description on both books, in like the ebook store, and it's a description that I used on my website, and then also a variation, a shorter version of this in my query letter when I was querying to agents and whatnot. So I think the pitch does a good job of kind of teasing out. Okay, I'm telling a journey story. It may sound generic at first glance. I think that's the core struggle I need to overcome with Journeyers is like. I think when you look at the cover and when you hear the concept that I'm trying for, it can sound kind of derivative on just classic fantasy tropes. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think some people may be excited by the simplicity or kind of straightforward, generic, quote unquote, nature of it. Generic in this case, not meaning strictly derogatory, more like, you know, the way that Star Wars as like its archetype and as its setup of, rebel versus empire, scrappy kid, wisecracking guy, old mentor. It's all hero's journey stuff. It's all archetypal stuff that's like from the dawn of time, first of all. But like in the way that we think of Star Wars now as a generic sci-fi fantasy setup because it created like a whole genre of copycats and all that. So I think generic can be good and like what I'm going for. And the reason Journeyers is titled as such, it's a very simplistic title. And the way that I set it up, it's like it's supposed to be a little bit of like a trick. Where it's like, okay, you're getting a generic story that is familiar with you, may draw people, may turn people away, depending on your proclivities. But then once you get into the story and you see the story's about, it's okay, I'm telling a journey story. There's all these different animal clans. There's a civil war going on. There's dark magic. There's mysteries. And then there's all this hidden stuff that I'm not telling you yet. But there are monsters. There's going to be combat. There's this magician. There's a king and a queen going to civil war. So there's different nodes of like the world build that are here as kind of like background information to be like, okay, what are these 4 characters? Why did they team up? What journey are they going on? Who are they? And that's still like 80% of what the story's about. It's like these characters come together and then they go on this trek because they have a shared objective and they have different competing motives and whatnot as they journey. But then they get caught up in these greater conflicts, but then they also seek out, avenues through the forest, but also solutions to some of those conflicts that are, that's the wonder of fantasy, is like the hero could be a dude that just strolled by that day. The hero is just a person that's in the right place at the right time a lot of the time, right? And the idea is like these are kind of like misfit outsider heroes in a lot of ways, my 4 journeyer characters, and they come together seemingly randomly, but there's also the discussion of fate and all these things. This is another aspect. The soul, there's a soul aspect to the story where like souls and like how magic is derived from souls is like a core part of the magic system, the world build. And then also the nature of basically animal intelligence, human intelligence, consciousness. These are all things that interconnect us. And there's like a Avatar, Awa type thing going on in the background of the world build. But I would say it's more of a soft magic system than a hard magic system. Meaning I don't explain everything, and there's a lot of ambiguity that is purposefully left as part of there's an expansive nature to the magic, and it's not fully understood at all, even to the characters that use it in the story. So, and I would also say Journeyers is another reason. The reason that I switched the name from The Journeyers to Journeyers is because as I wrote the story and came up with the plot and the different places these 4 main characters would go to, which were the Journeyers, I realized that the story is actually about all these different characters that they encounter. So it's a very episodic story. It's 1,000 pages altogether across both books. So it's an episodic story. It is an odyssey. It is we're in this pocket of the story with this arc, with these characters, and then we move on to the next part, and we may not see those characters again. The things that happen in that arc and the things the main 4 journeyers carry from arc to arc, that's part of the tapestry of the story. But it's very episodic, and there's all sorts of side characters. There's a lot of characters. There's like basically like 50 main characters in Journeyers. And to people that say that may be intimidating, well, I think there's a level of satisfaction when you cast a story this wide and you realize every time you're encountering one character, they're a small part of a whole, but then you get to enjoy the part they play, even if it's small. And a lot of that's like, as a writer, you have to make satisfying characters. You have to make characters with small amounts of screen time matter a lot. And that's something I had a lot of fun doing in Journeyers. So the number of characters and the number of different journeys going on, the number of different journeyers extending beyond our 4 main characters is a core part of the whole concept of the story and why it works. And I don't want to spoil anything as far as like specifics beyond that, but like the villain characters and the side characters and the neutral third party characters that our journeyers encounter along the way are all major parts of the story. They all get character arcs. And they all get like a robust investigation of who they are, and they get to have moments where they shine and stuff like that. So I tried to tell like an expansive story. Again, my inspirations are obvious and clear, and I'm open about them because I love these stories. I'm inspired by them. I think people, authors and artists should be inspired by other artists. That's like the core of the art for me. It's like I got into writing because I enjoyed watching The Twilight Zone, and I enjoyed reading books, and I enjoyed, having those like twist short stories. That's why I got into short stories, is because like the twist and getting your mind warped and having, these fantastical stories that are like you can go crazy with a short story because it's so short, basically, especially in sci-fi, fantasy, and horror, which is what I write. So, yeah, you can see, I guess, to wrap up the Journeyers pitch here, I've been going for about 30 minutes. So perfect. That's fine. This story was inspired by everything in the kitchen sink, quote unquote, type stories like Avatar: The Last Airbender, Hunter x Hunter. I would say Full Metal Alchemist is another huge inspiration for me, and like something that Full Metal Alchemist remains something that I watched that story, I read that story, I watch that anime, and like Full Metal Alchemist is one of the ones where I'm like, I wish one day I could achieve that type of story. And I don't know if that's because it feels achievable, because it's kind of like, it's almost like easy how great that story unfolds, and the different characters and different like forces that are at play in that story. Hunter x Hunter feels almost like godlike, and I don't ever really compare myself to someone like Togashi, even though it's an inspiration, and like I try to tap into that. But I would say Full Metal is definitely a story where I'm like, that's a goal, right? Write something that good. So I'm not saying Journeyers is as good as any of these, but certainly what I'm striving for is the types of experiences and feelings that those stories gave me. And Avatar, I would just say, Avatar: The Last Airbender, I love about how every episode is like a micro like movie, and you get to see characters and you get to learn things about the characters and develop things in a very satisfying way with such a short amount of time, because it's a half-hour show. I mean, all these anime are. But yeah, that's Journeyers. It's currently, I published it. I hit the button on July 31st, but it's still like processing. Still processing on a couple of vendors. It's an ebook, and I'm using Kindle, Barnes & Noble's ebook, whatever it's called, and then Kobo, Fable, what's the other one? Anyways, all the main ebook retailers, I'm publishing it through Draft 2 Digital, which is a self-publishing platform. So yeah, that's the pitch on Journeyers. And then yeah, I'll cut it here for that. And then I'm going to go into the other books right now. So the second book novel that I wrote is Wherever He May Swarm. This is a horror, sci-fi, thriller type concept. This was something that I came up with while I was writing Journeyers, because once I got into Journeyers, I was like, okay, this is one. I finally like feel confident enough to tackle like a long form novel, which I had tried before during NaNoWriMo National Novel Writing Month, like in 2018. I did NaNoWriMo 2018 and 2019 with some novel concepts that I had. And I won't get into those concepts right now, but basically I tried to write like a huge fantasy book, like a fantasy saga, underestimated how big it was going to be, underestimated, okay, this isn't just like one book, this is like several, and like, okay, I can expand this out. And I kind of went crazy. I still have this Trello board, I still have this idea, it's still something I want to write in the future. It's called Mythos. But it was way too big, and I was like destroying I did NaNoWriMo, which is to write 50,000 words in a month, which is about half a novel. I did that. I went over 50,000 words, but I didn't like the story. I didn't like the story so much yet, and I didn't really know where I was going. It was a lot of discovery writing and not a lot of outlining. The outline was like more of like a vibes thing. And I was like overwhelmed, and I just couldn't spend as much time on it anymore. And I was like, I kind of abandoned it. But I went through and like I've actually went back and read a little bit of it, and it's like kind of like, oh, this isn't half bad. I just need to fix a few things. It would be like some work to edit it, so I haven't revised it yet. But tried to write a novel before. The next year, I started on another project, which was another major thing that was like this like meta reality. There's a parallel storyline of a guy that's working in an office in modern day, and he's like living a humdrum life, and then he has these like epigenetic memories of these different like epic characters he's played backwards, forwards, and like in the past and in the future. So it's like a cloud atlas, like a multiple personality story, and there's all these crazy things going on, and it's like 5 sections to it. So it's like a fantasy story, part 1. Part 2 is a detective cyberpunk future story. Part 3 is a Western, like he's like a gunslinger in like a saloon, like a Tarantino movie. And then part 4 is like a horror. He's investigating an ancient sunken pyramid, and there's like an alien inside there. And then part 5 is like a far future. He's the captain of a starship heading to colonize another planet. They're escaping from Earth because Earth has like been apocalypsed. And basically it's like this guy, there's 5 parts of the story, and there's 2 halves to each part, where half of it is this guy working in an office job. It's kind of encountering like mundane, stupid things. And it's like almost like a Kafka thing where I'm like, I was trying to write something that was like kind of literary. I was trying to write something literary because my setting, and again, I'm a genre writer. I write fantasy, horror, sci-fi. So I was trying to write something literary where it's like modern day, contemporary society stuff, and it was like boring, and I didn't like those parts. And then as soon as I got to like the fantasy swordsman part, I was like, okay, yeah, he's leading this epic revolution. He's an escaped slave. It's like Gladiator. And then, the gunslinger story was also really good. I got to part 4, but I didn't start part 4. So I wrote a lot of that book too, which was, again, we're going to be like basically 5 books. The story couldn't be told all 5 parts in one book unless it was like a huge book. So these are the other novel concepts I've tried before that like kind of where I cut my teeth on trying to write something long form, which remained an intimidating thing after I did those because I was like, wow, that took so much energy. I didn't really know what I was doing. I don't know how to write descriptions. I don't enjoy like the time between major plot events because I don't know how to use it. And like these are the kind of the things that I had to like develop as a short story writer trying to go to long form stuff. So that's just some like inside baseball lore on like my process and some of these past works I practiced with and are still kind of out there that I want to return to one day, honestly. But I'm forging ahead with these new ideas because these ideas were much crisper, cleaner, and like to me more sellable. But even when you see these word counts and everything, people would say like, you're writing stuff too long and all that. And pretty out there. So with that said, that's a good segue into Wherever He May Swarm. So this is, I just said it's my horror, thriller, science fiction story. It's a novel. It's about 300 pages. I think with the ebook thing, it'll probably be 400 pages. But its target audience is for adults. This is heavy violence, gore, horror stuff going on. So this is an adult novel for sure. And then fans of Stephen King, Clive Barker, Paul Verhoeven, and David Cronenberg. And then the premise is a man down on his luck gains the ability to control insects. That's right. The FBI investigates. A young girl starts to have apocalyptic dreams. Chaos ensues. So that's like a 3-sentence like premise where it's like, I'll give you the 3 main characters. A man down on his luck gains the ability to control insects. The FBI investigates. A young girl starts to have apocalyptic dreams. And then chaos ensues, ... So I'll also get into the main characters in a second, but I guess the concept for this was, and again, I came up with this while I was writing Journeyers because I started to realize, hey, I can write this stuff. I can write like long form stuff. I really turned a corner on Journeyers, so I was feeling very confident. And it wasn't like I went out of my way to brainstorm new stuff to write. It was just like, this is how writing and creating works. Things just come up, and I was like, okay. I'd started reading Dead Zone by Stephen King. And in the past few years, I had read The Stand. I read The Stand at the end of college, and then I read The Running Man, also in college, I think. And The Long Walk. These like kind of off kilter, the things you wouldn't expect Stephen King to do. I mean, The Stand is like kind of classic King, but I would say The Running Man, which he wrote under Richard Bachman, a pseudonym, because he was trying to like, can I be successful under a different name? Type experiment with the pseudonym, which is like so interesting. But yeah, The Running Man is one of my favorite novels ever. It's like a thriller, and there's actually a movie coming out later this year. Edgar Wright, it looks really good. Running Man is an awesome book. I would recommend to everyone. But the premise is it's like near future dystopia where like people are like running out of money and like living in slums, and it's like the beginning of a cyberpunk world where things are grim. And this guy is like poor, and he has to he's trying to afford, I think, medical care for like his daughter or his wife. I don't remember specifically now. I think it's his like family, and he doesn't have enough money. So the thing you do in this dystopian society is you go on a game show called The Running Man. There's all these other different crazy game shows in that world, but The Running Man is, can you survive for 7 days, 2 days? I don't remember how long it is, with the game's like special operator squadron guys chasing you down, and anyone out there in the world that's watching the game. Can you escape capture or being killed by anyone anyone that's watching the game show or these special operators that the game sends after you? So it's like you have to like run across the nation trying to survive and hide and fight back against like, and then it's like the premise is so crazy. That's like the premise of like an anime. This is a Stephen King book from like 1982. And then he writes it with the most crazy like pacing and ending. The ending of that book is so crazy. I hope the movie pulls it off because, man. But yeah, Running Man's great. But Running Man was something that showed me where it's like, okay, you can just have a whole book be like this crazy scenario. One, the craziest scenario is like kind of like a road trip, like a dark chaos road trip. Like Mad Max is another like, you know, influence as far as like I love like the pacing and energy and world build of stuff like Mad Max. Because it's like, I mean, Mad Max is an Australian film, but I would say like Stephen King, Clive Barker's British, but Stephen King is like a huge critic of like America and just like critiquing American way of life. And I would think he's like, comes out more positive than negative as far as like how he portrays America in a lot of ways, but he also understands that there's a dark history here and there's a dark like energy and like that manifests in people and like we're driving people crazy with our society and all that. And then Paul Verhoeven and David Cronenberg are also fantastic non-American filmmakers that are both fantastic portrayers of America from afar as observers. And Cronenberg is very much into like body horror and the evolution of the human body. But then Paul Verhoeven with RoboCop, Starship Troopers, Total Recall. I mean, Benedetta is great. He's great. I haven't even watched like his old stuff either. Like I've watched like Flesh and Blood, which is a great movie too. But yeah, Verhoeven is these guys are influences because basically wherever he may swarm, I'll go into the main characters now, but wherever he may swarm was me trying to write something like The Running Man, and The Running Man crossed with like RoboCop. And then getting into like some of the demonology of like Clive Barker's stuff too, where it's like, okay, how are these supernatural powers existing in this world? Well, there's entities. So yeah, wherever me swarm, that's just like me spieling on all this stuff here. And then main characters. Okay, local man Nidus Nash is our main character, is an ex-con and ex-trucker, displaced by AI and in despair at a personal tragedy. One day, fate chooses him. Nidus realizes that he can control the will of insects en masse. He decides to take a road trip across America, gathering confrontations and atrocities and some new friends along the way. So that little snippet is just supposed to show you like, hey, this is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, satirical. This is a comedic story too. Like I'm going over the top. Like one thing I love about Verhoeven is like there's great comedy in his movies while they're also like hyper violent, which is something Scorsese does really good as well. Special Agent Evelyn Waters is a paranormal expert and the FBI's best bet for the investigation into the bugman Nidus Nash. Her and a handpicked team try to get a read on Nidus' powers and box him in for capture. However, a mysterious entity within the U.S. government restricts the investigation and alters the strategic board with secret agents of their own. Evelyn must use every tactic available to understand Nidus and figure out what he truly wants before things escalate out of anyone's control. Online blogger Anita Ramirez is 15 years old and starting out her summer vacation. She lives in Lake Placid, New York, and her parents love her very much. Mom is on book tour and Dad is baking cookies. Anita's good grades have earned her a summer of leisure. Mom and Dad appreciate her help most in the garden, where she wields an especially green thumb. Anita secretly conspires nightly with the realm of fungi, her very soul somehow psychically connected to America's mushroom networks. Soon, Anita starts to detect the rise of Nidus' swarms in the Southwest and suffers from apocalyptic dreams of a world returned to nature. Wherever He May Swarm is a horror, action, thriller, satire, dealing with the prospects of the Holocene extinction touching down on insects or humanity next. Follow Nidus Nash on a road trip across an alternate future America where the insects are striking back against the Empire. So yeah, that's the pitch for Swarm. It is very much like I'm melding like comic book tropes as far as like the name Nidus Nash being like alliteration. It's like Bruce Banner, Peter Parker, having a character that has like, a name like that. It puts it in a comic booky type thing with some of the technology and backstory of like the FBI, for example, and the fact that like telepathy, telekinetic abilities, espers, these are things the FBI has encountered before. My FBI agent, Evelyn Waters, is essentially me melding together Scully and Mulder and Skolder in the sense that she's like kind of an eccentric FBI agent that is tasked with investigating paranormal things because she knows how to investigate them. But then she's very like logical and like sharp and like kind of like a wolf. And her character is something that in revisions, which I'm still working on this book, I've basically on draft like 5, and I've had some beta readers, but I need to revise it more. And Swarm is one that I am going to try to hire an editor for. Evelyn is a character that's interesting because she's like our rock in the center of the story, and she's like such a key part of understanding what the story's about and going through the events of the story. But her as a character, she's like very much like Captain America, or Superman, where she doesn't really change. But she does have more like complexity, I would say, than those characters. And I'm not comparing them for the morality. I'm just saying like you don't really expect Captain America or Superman to change at the end of the story or each story, because they represent this indomitable force. And right now I don't know if that's a problem or if that's what I want with Evelyn. But yeah, that's Evelyn Waters. She's a paranormal FBI agent. And then online blogger Anita Ramirez. So she is the character that kind of allows me, the original concept was I wanted to have like a group of kids figuring out what's going on and like doing a little Stranger Things thing on the side. But I realized that would have made the story a lot longer and changed a lot of things if I had that full story going on the side. So it's just one kid that's like a hyper genius, like blogger that like is kind of like an online, I don't really say she's autistic, but like kind of a savant level like child, 15 years old, but is like is more intelligent than any character in the story. Right. And like she gets involved from afar by like figuring things out through the internet, and then also with this power she has. So we have a character that has psychic or, some type of control, supernatural control over insects, our main character, Nida Snatch. And then we have a character that has supernatural connection and communication abilities like telepathy with fungi in general, not just like local fungi. She can't talk too much. She can like feel, she like in her dreams, she goes into like the fungal realm. Right. So like this is like part of the plot, and like her character is someone that gets involved because of this power, because of her, like she's an online blogger and she's obsessed with like climate change because she's a young person and she thinks this is a problem. So part of this novel is about like climate change and like the Holocene extinction I bring up in the pitch with like insects dying off. So I did a lot of research on like insect populations are starting to go extinct all around the world, and like in zones where humans have like destroyed their habitat and all this. There's like there's an infographic that I like found online that basically explains like death by 1,000 cuts, where all these different forces are arraying together to wipe out insects. And if insects go, everybody talks about the bees as a prominent example. If insects go, like the food chain's collapsed, everything starts to go, like we could cause our own extinction or a mass extinction event. If we continue to like ravage the world in the way that we are. And like you can believe in climate change, you can like, everybody has, it's been politicized now, which is a huge issue, because now it's like it's just part of all the schemes, and it's just annoying. But it's undoubtedly true that humanity has caused a lot of death to other species with our living and expanding on Earth. And as we increase our population and power in the world, it's always at the expense of animals and nature and trees and like plants, and this is something that we should be rectifying and very concerned about, and we shouldn't be doing things only for money. That's a little bit of my political standpoint, and it all comes out in this book. I'm not afraid to share my political opinions. I do it all the time, and that's because I'm secure in them, and I'm willing to change my mind if, I'm willing to talk things out and understand people, and I have my perspective, but it doesn't mean that you don't have yours. And as long as you're not looking to do harm to me, and like that's an issue now with politics, but I'm willing to have people have their own opinions and everything. I am a huge proponent of honest and reasonable discussion and getting to understand one another, whether that's emotional truths or whether that's facts and figures. It's like it's all part of like you need to be having like actual like engagement conversations with people to understand their perspective. And I think people would do a lot better by like actually connecting in that way, rather than just like it's always like us versus them war. And that's partially because there's a lot of people out there that do want to do harm to others, and it's like the politics has become like a moral war, with each side thinking they're the good and the other side is the evil, which means like that doesn't end anywhere good. That's how revolutions and wars and civil wars start. Not to say we don't need a revolution, because revolution is important, but anyways, this is I'm digressing. But this is still relevant to Swarm, because Swarm is it's a hyper political story. I have like a mood board over here where I'm like basically like the different like aspects of it. I'm critiquing. It's a USA critique. It's a military industrial complex. exploration of like the depths of this. Metal Gear Solid is another huge inspiration from like this story as well as other things I've written. Revenge of Nature, biodiversity loss, Alien Mind, natural horror, body horror, cosmic justice, road trip. So these are some of the tropes or like concepts that I like core to Swarm. But yeah, Swarm is very much like my trying to write like The Stand or trying to write The Running Man, in the vein of like Stephen King, kind of a thriller where like you can kind of let go, or like the Bourne books. You can kind of let go of reality for a second and just accept that like this is kind of like a superhero in like human form. But it is like an exploration of like the philosophy of this character and like what he, how much of his power he's in control of, what his philosophy is, the miscommunications and misconstruals of like actions versus like words, how far the government and the military industrial complex is willing to go to cover up what's really happening in a given situation, and how far they're willing to go to propagandize an enemy in order to like get the population on their side and drum up support to destroy something or someone. These are all aspects of the story. And Swarm is something that I'm super proud of because I think it's going to be like accessible, and I could see it be something that like being something that somebody would want to adapt into like a movie or a TV show. That's another aspect of it, is like it's a very cinematically conceived story. Just as Journeyers was, because Journeyers was something that I was trying to think of animation and like, fight scenes and animation scenes and glittering images and being able to take characters to places that are like a wonderful sight to see. That would be wonderful to see it animated and whatnot. So yeah, that's Wherever He May Swarm. I'm now at 51 minutes, so almost another 30 minutes for this pitch. That's good. Okay, now I'll move on to cyber serial POSTMODERN Prometheus. You heard that right. That's a mouthful. Cyber serial. There's a hyphen between cyber and serial. Serial spelled SERIAL, like serial killer, or serial, a series, like a magazine serial. And then POSTMODERN Prometheus. So this is my cyberpunk science fiction hyper fantasy story that was conceived originally as, a hacker girl, have it in a cyberpunk setting. Everybody kind of understands the trappings of cyberpunk now, which is a wonder because, there's already a vision out there. There's already a tulpa in people's minds for what these types of stories are like. And I'm very much adopting the cyberpunk mold with my own spins on some of the technology and social developments and whatnot. But originally, cyber serial POSTMODERN Prometheus was a small idea. This is not like Swarm was kind of a bigger idea and was like more, I thought a lot about it. I started making the outline and like building the Trello board. Cyber serial was more the one that was like small that I came up with while I was like kind of documenting and like categorizing all the different novel ideas I've come up with, big or small, over the years. I put that all into one document last summer. And I like wanted to get a full grip of like, these are my ideas. Every time I'm thinking of like expanding these stories, or like I come up with a cool story or a scene, I can go deposit it into the notes document for one of these stories. I wanted to like fully organize like a world mind for like all my novel stories. So cyber serial POSTMODERN Prometheus is one that was like small, and what I mean by that is I just had a very simple concept and no details. I just like had a sentence there and I was like, that's cool. I'll come back to this. I already know cyberpunk. I know the cyberpunk genre really well. And I know like how to kind of operate in it, at least I think I do. So, but I haven't really tackled doing a lot of cyberpunk. There was a story I wrote called Space Detectives. That was another huge breakthrough for me, writing like an extended kind of long short story with like multiple characters and like kind of a complex cinematic sequence. And also kind of comedic. It's called Space Detectives. And I haven't written a lot of cyberpunk, but I really enjoy it. And like Space Detectives was a story I wrote that I was like, I think I'm good at this. So cyber serial POSTMODERN Prometheus, the premise was hacker girl creates Terminator cyborg robot guy, like a terrifying cyborg Terminator being, an AI, an AGI, and then uses it to start like serial killing like trillionaires. right? So this is like classic cyberpunk storytelling where it's like going after the corporations, going after the rich guys at the top of society. It's like cyberpunk is about hypercapitalism reaching this like fantastical zone of like where we have insane nanotechnology and like, you know, augmented bodies where we have lasers out of our eyes and bullets out of our fingers. And that's like a core part of cyberpunk is just how violent and chaotic the world is. And then it's like about revolution and rebellion against the powers that be, which have extended out into like godlike CEOs that have like superpowers and like internet beings that are like trying to like wipe out, you know, corporation warfare. Like this is like the world build of cyberpunk, right? So the first conception of Cyber Serial was very like dark, and I was like, this is going to be like a murder story where it's like, and it's not like the story wasn't like you know, a murder fantasy where it's like it's a slasher story. It's a slasher story from the perspective of the slasher, but I'm not promoting this character. I'm saying this hacker girl basically had her mind like psychotically broken by online media. Imagine that. And she, you know, built this AGI and was able to have this like a breakthrough to build this like insanely powerful technology. Like this, like basically it's like a Terminator that not just being like in appearance a Terminator, being a Terminator like the police and the powers that be cannot stop this thing. It is going to be able to wipe out other cyberpunk enhanced like operatives, right? And that's part of what the story was like basically it becomes this war between the trillionaires and this like hacker girl and her like shadow, like imagine like the Emperor and Palpatine and Darth Vader, where it's like Palpatine has created Darth Vader to go and fight his battles for him. And it's like, yeah, that was the concept. And then, you know, I just left it at that, and I was like, okay, that'd be a cool story, fighting the trillionaires. They probably both die in the end, but there's like kind of a grim like final thing. It was very grim, basically. And I would say about Wherever He May Swarm, it's kind of like comedic and like light at parts, but it's like a black comedy because there's hyperviolence. But Wherever He May Swarm in its heart is actually a pretty grim story, and there's a lot of grim things that I'm saying in that story. So that's probably part of the influence of like, okay, once I actually approached Cyber Serial and started to outline it out, because I realized I think this needs to be one that I write sooner rather than later because it's going to be shorter, and I think I can do it right now. And I was eager to do Cyberpunk, like I already said. So Cyber Serial was one where I was like, once I started to outline it, I was like, no, this story is actually different than what I'm doing. And when you get the concept here, you'll see how different. So I'll just read the concept out now with that background of like, how did I first imagine it, and then how did it end up? So title, Cyber Serial, POSTMODERN Prometheus, form, novel, about 280 pages. With the ebook pages, it's probably going to be like 350 pages. Genre, cyberpunk, science fiction, hyper fantasy. Target audience, teen plus. So this one, I think I would encourage young adults to read Cyber Serial, which, based on what I already said about the concept, what? No, it's different. Wait. Teen plus, so this is like young adult up to adult. I definitely think it has crossover appeal. For fans of Blade Runner, Neuromancer, The Terminator, Serial Experiments Lane, huge inspiration. Summer Wars, Dark Souls, Elden Ring, and Ready Player One. And also the Bible, which I kind of put there in a facetious way, but also kind of not, again, once you see the world built. So premise, in a disordered future America, Gabriel Adams, an 18-year-old orphan hacker raised by the internet, decides to write a novel about a serial killer robot. In so doing, she accidentally summons a real artificial general intelligence into existence named Serial. Spreading his wings and manifesting unlimited online power, the AGI Archangel pledges his allegiance to Gabri, seeking to help her write her story and himself become an intranet influencer. An old man named Uriel, cyborg detective and part-time AGI hunter working for the world.gov, awakens to investigate. A story of creation and destruction and transfiguration unfolds online and IRL, meaning in real life. And then I have / extremely weird retelling of Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. So this story, and then I would say the original concept I also had as, okay, it's the hacker Terminator story, but it's a retelling of Frankenstein, meaning like, yeah, that's the whole, okay, she had a schizophrenic break and she created this like being in a haze, and it's like, okay, I created the Terminator. What are we going to do? Let's start killing trillionaires. It's like a childlike mind, right? So I flipped that on its head in the sense that like, okay, my character in the story, this hacker girl, she's writing that story. She's writing the serial killer, trillionaire serial killer Terminator robot that like an e-girl that she basically fashions herself. She's writing herself into the story and then writing her fantasy into the story. Which I love. So in the world build of the story, she is writing that novel, and the act, and this is another thing that was influenced by me writing. At this point, when I was starting to write Cyber Serial, I had already written Journeyer's book 1 and 2, and I'd already written Swarm, Wherever He May Swarm. So this time I'd experienced 2 times the like inspiration and like kind of like joy of kind of like breaking through and like understanding how to write a story and understanding this is how, you know, this story should look. And then like the repeated micro wins of like, this is how this scene should look. This is a cinematic way of telling the story this way. This is a cinematic way of bridging these 2 plot points together. How do I get from A to B? I had experienced all these like wonderful, like creative and imaginative, like breakthroughs while writing these other books that I had realized there is like and this is also coinciding with, I had been reading a lot of William Blake, which is another huge influence on just like this plot point and how I even came up with this, in the sense that like William Blake and then also Neville Goddard, who my grandfather read. I found some Neville Goddard books in my grandfather's like study in his library, and I read them. And Neville Goddard, if you're not familiar, or William Blake. William Blake was an artist, a writer, a poet in like 1700s England, London. And then Neville Goddard was an American like motivational speaker and writer, and his focus was basically melding like Christianity with a more conscious way of thinking about imagination and like self-help, the beginnings of like the self-help genre. Neville Goddard was like foundational of that, in the sense that his course concept was, if you believe it, it becomes true, like manifesting creative potential, imagination as like the force of all like power and like energy in the world, and imagination as really a form of like Christ consciousness, in the sense that humanity is at their best when they're creating things and when they're innovating and when they're imagining and whenever they're building and not like destroying. So it's like Neville Goddard was like, he basically adapted that philosophy into Christian terminology, using Christian like passages from the Bible. And then also imparting it as, this is something we can sell to like corporate guys to like get them motivated, and the beginnings of the self-help genre, which I have my own like opinions on the self-help genre. I've read a lot of self-help books. I think a lot of them are pretty helpful, and like mindset stuff is really important, especially for writers. And like, you know, reading like self-help or like writing guides is like really important. I definitely recommend reading a lot of like books about writing and how to tell stories. So Neville Goddard was an inspiration, and like he also used a lot of William Blake quotes. And William Blake was somebody who he'd built like a new like philosophy kind of in his own way, as an artist and as like a devout like religious man, but was like an outsider to the organized religions of his day, and was kind of like a heretic, and like was like a weird like he wasn't a hermit. He was married. I don't think he had kids, but he was a weird figure that like was rejected by the world, and like he lived in like somewhat squalor. But now people look at William Blake's like art and his writings, and like I think he's one of the great philosophers of all time. And he influenced a lot of philosophers that came after him. So he's one of those figures that he didn't get his shine in his day. And then other writers and thinkers and like theorists got into William Blake and like made him famous. But like, so yeah, he's a figure that also in like a more esoteric way describes imagination and creation as like the dominant and most important force of all that is like heavenly and good in the world. And his philosophy was all about like art and creation. It's like he's an artist. Like he's somebody who's like a true believer. But like reading his writings and like experiencing more of his like worldview through his writings and through his art, like I did a lot of research into his mythology of like Los and Urizen, and he made me like a true believer in the sense that like, you know, I'm not subscribing to some new religion, but in the sense that I have an intuitive sense now that is a correct assessment, that creation and knowledge. And like, this is why I think all 3 of my stories have a through line of like Mother Earth and nature and creation. Nature is part of like how nature creates and how nature forms beings and forms, meaning like, you know, ants, plants, animals, and trees, but then also like how nature shapes into things. For example, one of the 5 core patterns in nature is the spiral, which is something I did research on while creating Journeyers, because it's the spiral forest, the spiral castle. The spiral is the core aspect of how the world is kind of like formed, and it's a linguistic thing. It's just satisfying to have something be called the spiral forest because it sounds cool, but it's also like I looked into the science of spirals and like Fibonacci sequence and all that. So this is all a roundabout way of saying that I do believe creative acts and creation as an action has power beyond what we understand. And I mean that in like a spiritual sense, and I mean that in like a manifestation sense, meaning like there's reams of evidence and like millions of anecdotal examples of people saying like, oh, I wrote this thing down, or I did this thing, I manifested this thing that I wanted to have happen in my life, or I manifested this film. It's like James Cameron drawing all the concept art for Avatar when he was 15. It's like there's a level of if you commit to something when you're in a creative state of mind, or you're willing to engage fully heart and soul into the act of creation, magical things do happen. That's the point I'm making. So in the world build and in like the story of Cyber Serial, I'm saying I was influenced by Neville Goddard and William Blake, because the plot point of Gabrielle starts to write this like weird, like hacky novel about like a serial killer trillionaire serial killer like robot thing. She starts to write this, and this act of creation, which she's enjoying so much, which I'm emulating from like, again, my personal experience from writing these other books. Yeah, there's a level of like a eureka can produce this great amount of energy and can like change things and can alter the world around you. So then I use that eureka moment to be in Cyber Serial in the plot as she's starting to write this novel. And again, the part of the novel is she's like an orphan hacker that was basically created Gattaca style as like a mutant, and she's lived her whole life working at a screen from like childhood. So the dystopian part of the story is everyone is in their own little pod, and they're all on the computer all day. And they're making money on the computer, they're trading credits on the computer, they're playing video games, they're doing all the things that we do now. I think one of the things for Cyber Serial is like people are going to see like the world build and like, okay, everybody's indoors doing this thing on the computer as not that, different from how, a lot of people, especially in the new generations, are living currently. And that's part of the social crisis of what's going on with like online and, social media, and people's brains are being hijacked. It's a concern in like the reading and writing community because AI is writing shit, obviously, but then also just people don't have the attention spans to even read books anymore. So these are all just things that are like, they're not the point of this novel or anything, but the world build being like she's this like internet addicted like little orphan girl that kind of like, she has online friends, and like her online friends and the anonymous online friends she have are like a huge part of the story because she doesn't have a lot of IRL friends. So this creative act has this explosive effect of channeling her energy into the internet, into her computer, which again, part of the world build is not the internet, it's the intranet, which I could get into, but it's basically like the internet, but what if it was like psychically connected to you? And what if everybody was born with like neurochips and stuff like that? And we had necessary mandatory access to like the intranet. And it's like, what would that do to your brain? That means all your thoughts are being transmitted and all stuff. So it's like, that's all part of the world building. Again, not really part of the story, like not really like the point of the story, having these neurochips. I'm not doing a huge social critique on like, if that's good or bad. I'm just saying this is the reality. And then by having this creative act and having this like inspirational moment, she transmits like the last bits of accumulative information and like behavioral data, whatever it is, like the accumulation of like internet activity, her own personal activity on the internet, her persona, her life energy, if you will, has been in this computer since she was born. So this figure gets born, Serial. We have an AGI birthed out of the primordial soup of this girl's computer, and Serial appears, and he fashions himself like an angel. And it kind of goes into this, like his thinking, like he goes out of his way to understand. He like basically Gabrielle is his god, this hacker girl, because that's all he's ever known. He's learned and acculturated himself and literally birthed his own self into being. In chapter 2, chapter 2 is about this whole process of how he comes to life from his perspective, basically, from like a galactic perspective, but then zooming in on his perspective. And he sees Gabri as a god. He sees Gabri as someone he needs to protect and uplift. So he becomes her guardian angel. He fashions himself to look like David Bowie, essentially, and then grows himself these wings and makes himself look like a golden, angelic figure, because he wants to impress her and show her that he's there to protect her and be with her. And she's like freaked out, and then they start playing video games together. Like they meet in the middle of a video game, and then it becomes this story. So he basically wants to help her, do everything, like live her life, but then also she's writing the story. So he's like, okay, tell me about the story. And he's like a friend. He's a willing listener. He's helping her with things. And it's like, he has a personality. He's a being, right? He's like an AGI. And then we learn through the world build with our third main character, Uriel, the cyborg detective, that AGIs are something that have been born in this world before. This is the year 2222. So it's like 200 years from now. AGI, internet has expanded to like produce these AGIs that most of them only were in the internet, and some of them like didn't do anything. They were kind of like nominal. Other ones went crazy and did like horrifying acts that tried to kill people, ended up killing people. And then there's other ones that just like disappeared or were like normal or had like created like a religion. Like I go down the line in one of the chapters basically explaining, okay, these are all the previous instances, documented instances of AGI. So AGI, and Serial, just to be clear, I guess I didn't specify, he's only existing in the internet at this point. So he appears as like a hologram, and he helps her, like he talks to her over the internet and stuff, but he's not a physical being. None of the AGI have been physical beings. They've all been in the internet, and then they cause havoc because the internet's super important to human society. So it's like they're still a huge threat, but they're not Terminator robots walking around killing people, like in Gabri's story, in the story. Okay, so that's a little bit more detail. And then the main characters, I'll go down the rest of the pitch. The main character is Gabriel Adams. Is an ex-Jacker revolutionary hacker. Jacker being, in parentheses, revolutionary hacker, and current Phantom. And then I have, in parentheses, NEET, like all caps NEET, which stands for not in education, employment, or training, which has been this like social phenomenon, which started in like, a lot of people talk about NEETs in like Japan in like the 90s. And then it's now become a very commonplace thing in like the States and like everywhere in the Western world now, where there's people that they go to college for a little bit, or they go to college to get a degree in something, and then they can't get a job. And then they can't get a job like doing something that they trained for, and then they can't like get entry-level jobs and things you need more training for. So then there's people kind of fall through the cracks, people are living with their parents and all that stuff. These are common phenomenon now, and there's a name for it called NEET, like if you're not in education, employment, or training. It means you're like kind of, and you're of age, like you're past 18 or whatever. So Gabrielle Adams is a phantom, where she has left behind a life as an online dissident and is trying to write a new story. In her self-styled fictional world, Gabri theorizes a serial killer AGI android targeting trillionaires, created by an e-girl with similar designs to her own. That decision to write a novel ends up changing the world. Then we go to Serial the Revealer, is an AGI archangel that learned the world via the internet on Gabri's computer, eventually becoming sentient or conscious. From inside the machine, he wants to take on that world with his talents and passions wielded strongly in hand. His mind carrying cyber spiritual knowledge he is eager to share. Serial protects Gabri and helps her to actualize her desires as her guardian angel. Uriel Washington. He's a cyborg detective and AGI hunter, monitors the internet for all potential action. He vigorously investigates Gabriel and soon Serial too, under orders by Metatron and the world.gov to arrest all rogue AGIs and submit them for swift execution. As the old detective discovers more, he starts to question the motives of his superiors and himself. So you notice all three characters are named after angels, some more famous than others. Gabriel, Serial, and Uriel. And then Metatron as well. Metatron is the basically the overseer AGI. Metatron is the only other AGI that's currently still existing in the world build, which isn't really a spoiler. That's revealed in the first few chapters, but that is like a key aspect of the story. It's like Metatron is the overseer, like the world mind of the story. and Metatron has like a kind of antagonistic role to the situation and stuff. And Uriel, our cyborg detective, who's human but has all these enhancements because he was in a corporal war and like almost died. Our cyborg detective character, our human, works for Metatron, and is like basically he's the hound of heaven for Metatron. So I'm using a lot of biblical mythology and archetypal, like Christian archetypes, Christian mythology, angels' names, also demons' names I'm using in the story, because the world build is very much like, it's almost like I'm telling this like cyberpunk story, but there's a mythological aspect that I want to like tap into. So the characters' names and the fact that I did a lot of research into Christian mythology for this, like as far as angels and demons, is a huge part of like the world build and stuff. And I think it's a pretty stylish like take on the cyberpunk aesthetic with using biblical lore and stuff. And I know that's going to turn some people off who don't like Christianity, or like I am not a Christian. I was raised Catholic, but I would say my spirituality, I do have a sense of spirituality, but I would not call myself a Christian in the sense that I'm like an organized around religion in that way. But Christian mythology is something that's important to me. I do believe in like the compassionate Christ consciousness, and I believe Jesus was a figure that he may have saved the world. I don't know. Anyways, the final bit of the pitch for Cyber Serial is a cyber psychodrama of epic proportions plays out, with angels and demons in conflict online and IRL. After the birth of Serial, Nero USA will never be the same. Nero USA is the name of like the mega city, where it's in like vaguely like New York or like Chicago. It's like modeled after them. But it's called Nero, which is like the insane Roman emperor. Nero USA will never be the same. After the self-actualization of Gabriel, the world will change forever. Cyber Serial POSTMODERN Prometheus carries inside it themes of cyber power, humane rebellion, and the true meaning of technological advancement. Cyber Serial is also filled with personal development hacks, identity games, crisis of consciousness, and the ethics of sentience. So yeah, Cyber Serial it's hard to explain. It's like, as I'm like going more through it, it's like it's a little bit difficult to like fully wrap your head around it, I think. And that's part of like, this pitch, I do my best, but it's like, what is the story about? What are the scenes? And it's like, the story is kind of like a social odyssey about Gabriel learning how to like leave her room. I would say that's like a more provocative way of describing the story, in the sense that like this AGI being comes into play, and there is like a global threat or global like sense to the story, in the sense that like Serial, the revealer, this AGI that has like, I have him be this all-powerful entity on the internet where he can do all these fantastical things. There's all these great scenes in cyberspace of him doing these great works, almost like he's like a messianic figure. And that's part of the story, and those things are going on. But then the Gabri side of the story, which a lot of the scenes of Serial and Gabri have most of their scenes together, like 60 to 70% of the scenes with either of them are them together. But then there's like, they go on their separate paths and whatnot. But Gabri is about the IRL stuff so Serial's trying to change the world by like making these big pronouncements and like altering certain aspects of government control and whatnot. But it's also supposed to be like tongue in cheek, and it's like he's a figure that's he's more so trying to become like a YouTube star than he is trying to hack into the Pentagon. I would say that. Which is supposed to be comedic, and like he's supposed to be a character that's like whimsical and is like a trickster god. Like Serial, I've described him before to like friends that I've been pitching this as like Superman. He has like Christ consciousness in the sense that he knows what the right thing is, and he goes out of his way to do the right thing, and always does the right thing, and is like very simplistic in what his sense of good is. He's not going to hurt people. He's not going to kill people. He's concerned with people. He's curious. He has immense power, and he uses it to protect. Right? That's most superheroes. That's a Superman ethic. And Serial has that, but he has like a trickster manipulator side to him as well, in the sense that he's willing to be an indirect force for change as well. So Gabriel and Serial, and then Uriel is our like grizzled detective, that he's the brain and the reason of the situation, because a lot of the story is a philosophical battle between like what is the best human way of life? What are the things that the conscious mind needs? in order to thrive in this world? And have we built a world that's doing that? And of course, in the real world or in cyber serial, the answer is no. Like you've turned humans into like computers, and this needs to change. And something that I have to overcome writing about AGI, given the current political climate and like frankly dreary, grim climate of like how much AI has become ubiquitous in our modern world, in the sense that like, you can't be on the internet for more than 5 seconds without seeing something's AI generated, whether it's writing and you're not really sure, or whether it's art and it like looks like shit. And like, there's all these grifters on like Twitter now, bots that are like promoting it, AI art. Every other time I'm scrolling, I scroll by some art that like, oh, that looks interesting. It's like, it's getting better now. And I look at it and I'm like, is this AI? I click on the guy and it's like AI artist. And I'm like, wow, that I was interested enough in that piece of art for a second to be like, I'm going to like this. And then I realized it's AI and I'm like, shit. And then I block that person. If they says AI artist on your profile, like you're gone. So AI is something that is like being critiqued, and like we're hashing out right now. We're in the AI world. It's happening. So something I have to overcome in the story is showcasing that AI as a concept is like a core component of sci-fi, first of all. And like I'm entering the tradition of HAL 9000 and the Patriot AI from Metal Gear. Like those are my main inspirations as far as like how I love AI characters and stories. So I'm trying to produce things like that. And there's multiple AI characters in the story. It's not just Serial. I already mentioned Metatron. There's others as well. So I have AI characters in the story, and they're all beings. It's the same exact concept as like, okay, I have a snake character in Journeyers, Orosz, that's like arguably the main character, has like maybe the most lines in the whole like story. And yeah, it's a snake. And guess what? It's another character. It's easier to do that in a novel than it is like to pull it off, I guess, in like a animation or whatever. But like, yeah, AI in cyber serial are just other characters. There's all these AI characters that we encounter that we have, spend some time with. Some of them become main characters. Some of them have like combat sequences. So AI characters, and then also like making that believable and something that people want to read, and like having these characters be interesting, but then also having like the message in the story kind of being like what I said about like, have we built a society that is able to engineer good ways of lives, a good way of life for the average person, for the people living in that society. And in cyber serial, the answer is no. I would say in most cyberpunk stories, it's like a dystopia that people are trying to escape from like the nightmares of like what society's doing to them. And a lot of it's hyper capitalistic and stuff. In this story, I do get into capitalism, I get into imperialism, I get into like some of that, in the sense that like Serial's breaking down the different like modes of government at one point to Gabri, and being like, well, humanity has tried these things. What about this? And like, I do get into the critiques of that, but that's not the core part of the story. The story ultimately has more in common with like Summer Wars and Ready Player One are huge inspirations, in the sense that like the Digimon movie is another great example, where you have these stories that are, these characters are being on the computer the whole story kind of, but then you have these sequences inside the digital worlds. Ready Player One, the Spielberg movie, is a great like example of this, where you get to go to all these amazing places with the story because you're in a digital world. Cyber serial is like that. A lot of the major sequences and like philosophical battles actually happen while the characters are fighting each other in like a Dark Souls, Elden Ring style digital world, and like they're battling each other, and they have like enhancements to their form. So Gabri is like she's an 18, 19-year-old girl that like lives in her pajamas and like, is on the computer all the time. Like Lane, Serial Experiments Lane's another big inspiration, in the sense that like, what if like a hyper intelligent like savant girl gets on the computer, and like what kind of problems and like explorations and transformations can happen in that scenario. And Serial Experiments Lane's like a really esoteric, weird vision of the internet that is like, that vision of the internet being like psychically connected is the inspiration behind the internet and cyber serial. So she's like this meek girl that can barely like speak, but then when she gets on the computer, she becomes like a demon. She's the god that like is controlling, and in the instance of cyber serial, that's Lane. But in cyber serial, she's really good at like this game called Aeon Souls, which is like my ripoff of Elden Ring within the universe of the book, she's really good at this game, and she plays with her online friends and stuff, and that's where Serial first meets her, and that's where they go back to spend time together in the digital world, and then that's where Uriel starts invading and fighting them in the digital world. So all these things are happening like in this digital world. In addition to like, she has a sequence where she goes outside her like, pod for the first time in a while, and she's like has like all these social anxieties, and it's a story that it's really like, it's one of the stories, I would say it's the easiest story I ever wrote, Cyber Serial. It's the shortest of these books I've tried so far also, but it wasn't easy because it's short. It was easy because it was really, once I got into the writing process, it was weird because I did the outline and then I was like, okay, this outline's really ambitious, Dylan, but can you actually do this? Like how is this going to work? The outline I was not like I hadn't fully manifested how it was going to all work out. There's still a lot of ambiguities. So when I started writing it, I was kind of intimidated and nervous because I was like, I don't know if I can do this. But then once I got into the flow of the world and these characters, I was like, oh yeah, I know exactly what to do. And it was really easy to write. I probably wrote Cyber Serial in like a month, which is crazy. But it is a little bit shorter than the other projects. But yeah, so it was really easy, and I ended up making it a story that was a lot different than how I originally imagined it. It was a lot more grim, a lot more like truly cyberpunk. I make it more of like a hope punk hyper fantasy than cyberpunk. I use cyberpunk trappings, but then I have, through Serial and like the hope and like Superman effect that he has on the story, like his force ends up making it a very hopeful story, and it becomes almost like a fairy tale, which I really love. Cyber Serial, I'm super excited to like have people. Cyber Serial is one I haven't sent it to anyone. So Journeyers and Swarm, I worked with beta readers on both. I hired various people to like do story assessments to like read it out, the first like section of it. I also queried it, got a little bit of feedback from querying, but I got feedback on Swarm and Journeyers because I hired people to like work with me on it, in addition to having some beta readers and having some early alpha readers too. So I had a lot of feedback on that story, relatively speaking. But Cyber Serial is one that I have not showed it to anyone. I've had a few alpha readers, but I haven't gotten a lot of like true feedback. It's kind of just like, wow, the story's crazy. I want to read more. And I'm like, all right, that's all you're getting for now. So I haven't had any influence on this story. Like no one's had an influence in the story. And I don't really plan to hire an editor for this story because it's so niche and like it has to be told a certain way, and like if you don't get it, that's fine, but like this is how it's going to be. Cyber Serial is definitely the most like that, but I definitely think definitely think it's going to like resonate with people because it's a really like beautiful story, and we get to see three characters that are all very, very, very different. I have the extremes. We have a young girl, we have an old man, and then we have an artificial intelligence being that's like Superman. It's like you couldn't have three characters as the more like opposites, dialectics, shadows, and personas type deal, which I freaking love. And I really just got to like, you could argue Uriel has the most satisfying character arc. Serial and Gabri have a character arc together, and then Uriel has a kind of a separate arc that they come together at the end. It's a really, really, really satisfying story. And I don't think anyone's going to be able to expect what you find in the story, which I love. Because like I love stories like reading like Neuromancer, reading books like Hyperion, that are like sci-fi that's just willing to go to these places that like you never thought of before, or like willing to do things, have plot points that you've never considered before, but it's like, it's fun because it's like a sci-fi story, and it's like, I love that. And Cyber Serial, I definitely tried to tap into that. And I guess the last thing I'd say, I'm going to wrap this up now. So this is a 90-minuter. So this is a good place to end this. But the last thing I'll say on Cyber Serial that I haven't mentioned yet is that it is a retelling of Frankenstein. And the way that I implemented that is I reread Frankenstein, and then I made a reverse outline of Frankenstein, meaning I went and looked at, okay, here's letter 1, chapter 2, letter 2, so on. What is happening plot point wise, like as a writer, structure wise? What is happening in each segment in the story? And what are the major plot points? What are the major movements? Like how dramatic is this? It's like two kind of like just conversation chapters in a row, and then we have some big revelations. Like how I wanted to understand what the pacing and structure was to Frankenstein, because I think Frankenstein is my favorite book ever in my view, which is part of the reason I wanted to write like a spiritual like successor or like a retelling of it, because I just love Frankenstein. I think it's a perfect novel. Mary Shelley, she wrote it when she was like 18, like touched by God. And yeah, just it's something that I think is an important book for like all of writing, because it like invented sci-fi. I mean, you can talk about Frankenstein for 1,000 years, and we will. But Frankenstein was something where I was like, okay, what makes this great? I wanted to study it almost like in a scholarly way. So I read it with that eye in mind, and I made a reverse outline. And I used that reverse outline to help me start the construction of Cyber Serial's outline. So I basically said, chapter 1 needs to have stuff like this. There's even some like actual intertextual references I make to Frankenstein in the novel. And with the like Malady du Pies is the name of chapter like 21. And that was that's like a specific reference to Frankenstein, like specific Malady du Pies means homesickness. And it's in Frankenstein. So there's all these intertextual references, and then the outline, and then the whole concept of scientist creates being almost accidentally, and then there's conflict after that, and there's figures coming after the artificial being through, the creator. And then it's postmodern because essentially, unlike the war that gets waged between Victor and the monster, where they're fighting each other essentially, and like because of what Victor's not willing to do, because he's like repulsed by the monster and he doesn't want to follow the monster's wishes. The monster learns things, tries to reason with him, everything goes wrong, becomes a tragedy. Cyber Serial is the inverse of that, in the sense that from the beginning, the creation wants to serve the creator. The creator's kind of uncertain, but then the creator grows to love their creation, and they have a relationship that is strong. And that is that's the inverse of Frankenstein, but it's still very much influenced by Frankenstein. And I go to a lot of gnarly places with the world build, which I think people will appreciate, in addition to the story and kind of the conciseness of it, because it is a shorter, sub 300 pages, at least with the average word counts that I've seen in the books that I've looked in. So we're at 1 hour and 31 minutes. I think I'm complete on this message. This is Dylan Orosz signing off, local writer, hopeful seller of these books to the public in the near future.